Hey, I am so excited to get to be with y'all and talk. First of all, I'm just excited to be here, so we'll start right there. And to deal with a 1-hour introduction to the book of Deborah, which, Matt, I've never done before. So I've finished that about, an hour ago. And let's see if I'm overly optimistic about what we can do in an hour. That would not be unusual. How many of you are actually studying Deborah right now? Ooh, oh my gosh. Okay, a whole slew of you. And how far have you gotten? How far have you gotten? 6. Okay, so have you gotten into the battle yet? All right. We love the battle. Oh, yeah, we do. Okay, so the study itself, Deborah, Unlikely Heroes, and the book of Judges. And the book of Deborah is absolutely full of unlikely heroes. I love the unlikely heroes. Deborah herself, certainly. Barak is also unlikely in the scenario. And then my girl, JL. Come on. Whoever expected the great heroine with the ancient Near Eastern equivalent of a frying pan to take out the bad guy, you know? Woo! All right, so here's a study. For those of you who are not studying it, my whole ambition this evening is to get you addicted so that you have to study. So just a little introductions. This is my crew. This is my crew actually about 7 years ago when we first moved to Westmont College, and that's my little installation photo. This one is a little earlier. Yeah, so Elise, the youngest on the far right, hates it when I show this picture because she thinks she's so much more sophisticated now. And here's the one where she's looking a little more sophisticated. So those are my peeps, Steve, Noelle, and Elise, and they're off doing their things while I get to be in Birmingham, Alabama, which I'm pretty excited about. All right, so let's dive on in to introductions dealing with Deborah, the book of Judges, and all of our unlikely heroes. As you might realize, the book of Judges was a pretty crazy time in Israel's history. Some people like to call it the heroic past of Israel's conquest settlement era, when the stakes are high, the rules are fuzzy, and sword-swinging heroes are larger than life. In the days of the Judges, this heroic past, we could compare it to our Wild West. And if you think that through, when the good guys are just a few steps away from the bad guys, when the town marshal learned his skills from the local cattle rustlers, that kind of era. And again, where the marshal's greatest skills, or considered skills, are his ability as a hired gun, yeah? This is the kind of time we're dealing with. So let's go ahead and, I'm going to have trouble with this clicker. I'm going to pull this one out, actually. So as we look at the book of Judges, in many ways, we need to be thinking about Tombstone, Arizona, maybe, or Daniel Boone, or the heroes of the Wild West, or for those who are younger in the crowd, perhaps the Captain Americas, Tony Starks, and a little bit of Black Widow mixed in as well. The kind of folk that you really want to show up when you're in trouble, but the kind of folk you don't want living next door, This is our era. So this is a time for Israel of great moral darkness. And if you spend any time in the book of Judges, you are crashing into this moral darkness. And by the time we're done with this book, the narrator is going to make a case that unless we get a king in the mix, and we get that king in quick, we are all going to hell in a handbasket. That's what they're up to. So let's put our book into real space and time. All of you Seedbed Epic of Eden fans have seen this timeline before. Oh, yes, you have. The era of the Judges actually falls in the prehistory of Israel. So we're still dealing in probabilities and possibilities. We don't have a slam dunk historically on most of this material. Who knows? Maybe all will go on into biblical archaeology and we'll get a slam dunk before we get a lot further. It's all going to depend on where you date the Exodus. Do we date it with the early date from 1 Kings 6:1, 1446 BC, or do we lean toward Albright and the biblical archaeologists and look at about 1270? But as we look at the program, we're coming out of the Exodus, Sinai and the desert wanderings. Again, are we going to put that more toward 1400 or more toward 1300? And we follow it with Joshua and the conquest. We love that story. We name all of our sons Joshua and Caleb. Yeah, I work at a Christian college. A good 25% of the boys on my campus have the name Joshua or Caleb somewhere in their names. And then we land right here. So this is our era of the Judges, and we're going to start moving out of that shadow zone where we're not clear on history issues when we reach the monarchy. And with the monarchy, we're going to start coming out of those shadows. But we do have a couple of benchmarks historically that we can drive our stake in the ground. The first one is the Merneptah Stela, which is Pharaoh Merneptah's great victory monument declaring that he has defeated this people group named Israel. No one knows who they are. They are clearly a tribal, decentralized group, but Merneptah beat them and he wants to advertise it. That's about 1208 BC. And then we have this other benchmark, which is the Shechem Fortress Temple, and you're just going to have to study the curriculum to find out all about it. But it does show up in Judges chapter 9, which is kind of fun, and that's about 1100. So we're looking somewhere between 1200 BCE. So there's our real time. Let's take a look at real space. And again, those of you who've done my stuff, you've seen this map before. I actually stole it from Bill Arnold about 20 years ago, and I just keep reusing it. Okay, so what has happened? You know, our team has come out of Egypt. It took me a long time to do that, so I'm doing it again. Our team has come out of Egypt, out of Goshen, down to Sinai. They get the covenant. Then they leave Sinai. They try to enter the promised land. Joshua and Caleb are the only ones that say yes. You know the story. The other 10 go, oh no, the Canaanites are too big and too scary. And Moses says, were you there like last week when he parted the Red Sea? Yeah. So our guys wind up in the longest sanctification episode of any church history story. 40 years they wind up in the wilderness getting the unholiness beaten out of them until finally they're ready to head up the King's Highway and enter the promised land. Woohoo! At which point, our man Moses, who a lot of people think this was a sad moment for him when he had to say goodbye to the tribes, I think he's kind of a retiring pastor, Matt, yeah, who's looking at this motley crew saying, 40 years with y'all. I love you, but I'm going to go find myself a drink with an umbrella in it. And we all think that he died up on Mount Nebo. I think he's in a witness protection agency. Yeah, that's what I think. Okay, so our team crosses the river, and we have the conquest. Moses happily hands the mantle of leadership off to his man Joshua, and Joshua takes us into the promised land. So if we're to map this, Joshua has 3 campaigns. Now, there are a lot of different battles in this mix, but our narrator wants to distill it down to 3 campaigns. 3, 7, 10, 12. We like those numbers, don't we? So your narrator has distilled it, and we have the central campaign that starts with Jericho, Bethel, Ai, and they have a moment in Shechem. And then we have the southern campaign, which takes them down by Hebron and Arad. And then we have the northern campaign that takes them up to Tyre and Sidon and Hatzor. Okay, these are the 3 great campaigns. After the death of Moses, the servant of Yahweh, the Lord said to Joshua, He said, get in there. Get in there and get it done, yeah? And if you've spent any time in the book of Joshua, you know that be very strong and very courageous. Gets repeated, 27 times. Why do we think Joshua is being told to be very strong and very courageous? Because this is going to be very hard and very scary. Therefore, so Joshua heads in with these 3 campaigns. This is Joshua 1 through 11, and we're like, woohoo, our team has won. This is a kind of a blitzkrieg. The Canaanites are gone. And in the midst of that, kind of a side note, pay attention to Hatzor, because Hatzor is going to show up again. Hatzor is going to be very important in the story of Deborah. So that city, which the biblical archaeologists would say is the poster child of the conquest narrative, keeps popping up. And just for fun, let me show you Paul Wright of Jerusalem University College, a dear friend. I've worked with him for more than 20 years. And he is telling the same story standing in the little tourist lunch spot beside the tell of Hatzor. And because he's Paul Wright, he's telling the story with rocks. Yeah? Only Paul Wright gets to do this. Okay, so this is the conquest part of the story. The next part of the story, and that's Hatzor, by the way. The next part of the story is the distribution of the land. And honestly, this is the part that we typically miss as students of the Bible. We read Joshua, and it's kind of like the way they produce The Lord of the Rings. Track with me if you can. This amazing 3-volume set about all these beautiful relationships and the great quest of humanity. And Hollywood reduced it to 4 big battles. So sometimes we do the same thing with Joshua. We miss the second half of the book, which is all about the tribal allotments of the land, which is really, really important because at this moment, what we see is that Yahweh has kept his promise. Abraham heard from God in Genesis 15, I am giving Canaan to my people. This is the moment when Canaan is actually given to the offspring of Abraham. Okay, so we're going to have this first great moment up in Shechem. And Shechem, as you can see, is kind of in the middle of the country. As you will learn, this is also a very important cultic center for the Canaanites. So Joshua takes his people up to this sacred space, and he sort of takes it over for a while. And he uses this space and this moment to distribute the land to the tribes. You've seen this sort of map dozens of times in the back of your Bible. Yeah, and in those dozens of times, what you've seen is 12 tribal allotments, yeah? And what Joshua does, as they have assembled way up north, is he passes out every parcel of land, every creek, every agricultural field, every barley patch, every mountain range, from the third tree to the west of that particular sand flat to the fourth tree to the east of that particular creek bed. Every corner of this land is handed out to one of the 12 tribes, and that's very, very important to the ongoing identity of Israel, because this land will always belong to those particular tribes. But here's the part we kind of miss. And that is that after the conquest of Joshua, Israel doesn't control this land. Israel has settled in this space right here. This space right here. I'm going to do that again, the little overlay. And that's the territory that our team is actually controlling. How do I know that? Yeah, not a great percentage, right? They've got the central hill country, if you know the topography of the land. They've got a little bit over there in the Transjordan, and they settle in. And they settle in with the archaeological profile of our early settlement, hence the picture I just pulled up, the Bet Av, the family compound. So the promise has been fulfilled. This land has been distributed. But Joshua is going to hand off leadership to the tribal elders, and he's going to say, okay, team, now go get your territory. So yes, we've broken the back of Canaanite power. Yes, you are situated. You've got your feet on the ground. But look at that map. We have got a heck of a lot left to do. And that's what the book of Judges is all about, is this cycle of moving through their identity as God's chosen people, whether or not they're going to keep the covenant, and all of that is tied to the possession of territory. All of it is tied to the possession of territory. If they keep the covenant, they'll keep the land. If they break the covenant, they'll lose the land. And as we translate that message into our new covenant, spoiler alert, if we keep the covenant, we will gain territory as well. Not this kind of territory, because we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but we will gain the territory of the kingdom. If we fail to keep the covenant, same results. Okay, a little socio-political information for you here, right here. See that? I'm doing it again, right there. That is the major trade route of the ancient Near East. That highway that I just put on the map connects Egypt, see my little blue at the bottom, isn't that clever? Connects Egypt to Mesopotamia. So every great nation that has ever occupied the Fertile Crescent, the ancient Near East, one way or another has got to travel on this highway. Every caravan that ever moves, think 18-wheeler, yeah? Every caravan that ever moved, every army that ever marched needed to make use of this highway. So if you control this highway, all of you business people in the room, what do you also control? Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. We want that highway. Look at our team. Does our team control any of that highway? No, would be the quick question. Okay, so our team is in the land. How do we know they're in the land? Well, we can track the settlement through the dirt, yeah? And what we see is that as soon as our team arrives, they bring with them new architecture. Yeah, and the new architecture is something called the four-room pillared house, which is going to endure all the way into the New Testament. It's kind of the three-bedroom ranch of early Alabama. Think of it that way. And when you see, what is it, French Arcadian move-in, is that what we call it? And when we see, let me start before, three-bedroom ranch, split level, yeah, okay. And then we move into some of the more contemporary architecture. You intuitively recognize the waves of settlement in your hometown. You intuitively recognize that the houses in downtown Birmingham are built by an older standard of what is beautiful architecture. And you can tell without anyone even asking you when you drive into a brand new suburb. You can tell by the architecture. You may never have asked yourself that question, but you know that. So this wave of new architecture, four-room, pillared house, marks the influx of our team. Just a shot of some past students standing in a four-room pillared house. This one's down in Beersheba. You can tell they didn't have a lot of extra space for extra wide refrigerators. Yeah, these are little tiny things, but this four-room pillared house becomes classic. So from about 1200 onward, we see that territory controlled by this architecture. We also see new agriculture move in. Oh, I don't know, like when you moved from cotton to peanuts, perhaps, or from peanuts to soy. And so that new agriculture also marks a new settlement. And what the Central Hill Country had been before our team settled was very heavily forested with evergreen oaks. You know about those, yeah? And so our team had to pull out those oaks to create land for agriculture, and then they had to control the topsoil. So that's what all that terracing is about. You create these little flat platforms, and you plant the three big crops coming out of Israel, which is grapes and grain and olives. So we see that shift. The other thing we see is a shift in pottery. We go from beautiful Middle Bronze Age elite pottery barn to gonna pick it up at Walmart in the clearance section. You know what I'm talking about. So our team is not fancy. They are newly settled. They are decentralized. And they're kind of the hillbillies of the ancient world. But we love them. Yes. Okay, the other thing that's very fun, especially if we have a Texan in the room. Do I have... Okay, Texans. You know all about these guys. Yeah? Wild pigs, the boars that have taken over Texas right now that are reproducing at lightning speed. One of the new industries is helicopter hunting. Yeah, which I think only in Texas, you know? Well, what's so fun about the Central Hill Country is they have an indigenous population of pig. And our team is subsistence economy. They're barely making it. The hunger season is a good 60 days every year. Our people are holding on by their fingernails, and Meals on Wheels is running through the backyard. Yeah? But nowhere in the Israelite sites, look at the chart on the right-hand side, do we find pig bones. Our team doesn't eat pig, even though they're hungry. Now, why would they not eat pig if they're hungry? The answer is there has to be some sort of societal taboo, think the book of Leviticus, that says we don't eat those. Just like I could be really, really, really hungry, and I'm not eating a dog, just not doing it. I could be really, 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 really hungry, and I'm not eating a rat. Not happening. These people don't eat pig. Okay, so all of that in the ground tells us that our team has arrived and tells us that their territory is limited. And it's with that we step into the book of Judges. So one more time, on the real time, we leave the conquest and we're leaving the conquest, we're headed toward the monarchy, and right here is our era of the Judges. And I like to speak of this era as liminal space. It sounds fancy, doesn't it? It's not. Liminal space means the in-between space. In between what I was and what I really want to be. I'm now an undergraduate professor. That's what college, that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. What I was, 17 and a half, coming in my freshman year, what I hope to be, you know, a software designer, business baron making millions of dollars. So our team is in that liminal space. And this, again, I think is very important to us as we apply the Old Covenant to the New. They're in between where they've been called out of, heading into what they're being called into, and where are they right now? That awkward space in between, that awkward space in between. And Matt, I forgot to ask, how long do I have? 7:30. Oh, good. I got a whole other half hour. Okay, this is good news. All right, so are we okay? Real space, real time. Nobody wants a pig in their backyard. I kind of want a pig in my backyard, but I want like a little cute pig in my, not a big one. All right, so this is where we are. And again, if you want to know more about the Merneptah Stela and about the Shechem Fortress, you're just going to have to take the Bible study. That's real time, real space. Look where our people are, up in the Central Hill Country. And again, look where that highway is. That's going to be of interest to us, particularly when the highway turns right, because it's turning right through something we're going to come to know as the Jezreel Valley. Okay, we've done real space and time. Let's take a look at real literature. Let's look at the structure of the book itself. And I'm very entertained by this image because this is supposedly Deborah and Barak headed to the battle, looking a lot like people from the Middle Ages heading to the Crusades. And I love the fact that Deborah doesn't get her own horse either. You know, she's kind of riding on the back of Barak's horse. Okay, what about authorship? Well, when we dive into authorship, we're always diving into complicated questions. The Talmud, Jewish tradition, tells us, quote, Samuel wrote the book that bears his name, and the book of Judges, as well as the book of Ruth. That's the ancient Jewish perspective. Critical scholarship, as usual, is all over the map. But everyone recognizes that this book is structured around 12, ooh, we like that number, yeah? 12 deliverer narratives. hero narratives. When we think about our Daniel Boone, right, and our frontier heroes. Those 12 deliverer narratives run from 2:6 to chapter 16, the end of 16, and those 12 narratives are couched in the words of our historian. They are framed by the guy who was responsible to take all of these stories about the various judges and put them into a final presentation. So those narratives about folks like Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, and our girl Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Jephthah, Samson, all of those various narratives have been selected for a reason. Were there only 12 judges? No, there were likely many more. Did the judges rule in multiple places at the same time? Most likely. Each one of these 12 represents a different region. That's interesting. And they have a particular story to tell. And it's going to be our biblical narrator, our historian, who puts these stories together in order to communicate the theological message of the book. So how do these deliverer narratives speak to Israel's story and to ours? Well, to quote my friend and colleague, Lawson Stone, there will be no eulogizing of the ordinary here. He's good with words, isn't he? No eulogizing of the ordinary here. No democracy of the mediocre. For those of you who've met Professor Stone, you know he loves Westerns. Tombstone is his favorite movie of all time. He has so much fun with these stories, yeah? And the frontiersmen. Okay, so what are we going to look at? The frame looks something like this. We've got a prologue, and that prologue rehearses Israel's mission. It's the moment when Joshua hands leadership off to the tribal leaders. And what does he basically say? God has acted on your behalf in the past. God has commissioned and empowered you to accomplish the present. Now get out there and do it. And the do it is take that territory that you control and reach further to the boundaries that have been commissioned to you. The task has just begun. So that's the prologue. We're going to have our 12 stories, and then we're going to have an epilogue. And that epilogue is a really challenging bit of literature. We'll get there in a second. So Othniel is our first guy, and he is recognized as an exemplary judge. Ehud and Shamgar, they're triumphant. They are just great battle stories of left-handed assassins and people who kill entire battalions with a donkey jaw. Okay, they're just cool. Then comes Deborah. This is our girl, our focus. She also is understood as triumphant, but unlike so many of her colleagues in this list, she is completely, unambiguously exemplary. She doesn't have a dark side. Yeah? She's not Catwoman or Black Widow, who, if you know all the background of DC Comics, et cetera, you know that there's a story back there. No, she's just squeaky clean all the way through. So Deborah we're highlighting. Now we're going to start the decline. Gideon and Abimelech, ambivalent, don't know what to think about them. Jephthah and Samson, tragic. I don't know about you, but if my girl brings home a Samson, I'm locking the front door. Yeah? That guy's not coming in my house. And then we get to the final end of the story, which is the epilogue and the appendixes. Have y'all bumped into Judges 19 anywhere along the way? The story of the Levite and his second wife / concubine. This is the end of the book of Judges. So we've gone through all of these cycles of what should be great heroes, and we end with this incredibly tragic tale that emerges from incredibly compromised behavior and morality. We'll get there in a moment. So I got my little chart here, and each one of these judges tells us a very similar story, 12 times. And the 12 times each starts with a season of obedience. So we start with Joshua, we hand it off to Othniel. Joshua is a season of obedience. He's a guy who shows the people how to follow Yahweh. He keeps them away from Elohim Acharim, which means other gods. That's always the besetting sin of the Israelites, that they start following after other gods. That obedience lasts for a season, and then they start drifting into disobedience. Every one of these 12 cycles tells the same tale. They start drifting into disobedience to the covenant. They, of course, don't notice that they're drifting into disobedience to the covenant because they're happy and they're comfortable and life is fun. And Yahweh, as he promised in the Sinai covenant, answers that drifting with foreign oppression. Let me remind you, this is Israel's covenant. This is not yours. Yeah? So military crisis, plague, disease in the United States of America does not mean that Yahweh is unhappy with his people. We're in a new covenant. But in this covenant, foreign oppression absolutely means that Yahweh has stopped defending the borders of the promised land because the promised people have failed to keep covenant. So the foreign oppression starts moving in, the Amalekites, the Amorites, the Moabites, the Edomites, and in that moment of foreign oppression, the people realize there's a problem, they repent, they cry out for deliverance, okay, big wake-up call, and God sends them a deliverer. And that deliverer is what we call a judge. Yeah, so Othniel and Ehud and Shamgar and Deborah, these are all judges. Now, when we bump into the word judge, we think someone who works in a courtroom, yeah? And someone whose entire job is to discern between who's broken the law and who hasn't, and to mete out judgment. That is not the case in the book of Judges. Rather, these judges, kind of when they retire, will have that sort of litigious task. But at this moment, they are called forward as a charismatic leader, and I mean charismatic in the sociological sense. They're the sort of person that people want to follow. They move throughout the tribes, they muster a volunteer force, and they take that volunteer force and they go out after the enemy. Because Yahweh is on their side, they wind up with military victory. And that military victory reminds the people that commitment to the covenant is going to keep them whole and at peace. The judge takes a position as kind of that societal leader, and we move back into a season of obedience. Okay, this cycle repeats itself 12 stinking times in the book of Judges. And by the time you get to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, you're like, dear Jesus, when are these people going to figure out what they ought to be doing? Then you look in the mirror and you say, dear Jesus, when is this person going to figure out what she's supposed to be doing, right? With each repetition, it is hammered into our brains what the real problem is, keeping covenant. But this repetition in the book is also doing this. So by the time we reach the 12th cycle, this is where we bump into the story of the Levite and his concubine. A Levite is a member of the priestly class, right? A Levite should be a good guy or a bad guy? Good guy. He's got a concubine, a second wife, yeah, which in that era is legal. His wife leaves him. Do we do that casually in the ancient world? No. She leaves him, she goes back to her father's household, and her father takes her in. Do we do that casually in the ancient world? No. So the Levite goes back to find her. He talks her into coming back to him. The father is convinced. They set out on a journey. They're heading back north. As they're heading back north, this Levite wants to get past foreigner territory and get back into his own tribal territory, which, by the way, is the tribe of Benjamin, another very interesting theme. So they come to Jerusalem, which does not yet belong to our team, still belongs to the Jebusites, and he says, no, we can't stay here. These are foreigners. We must move on to Israelite territory. So they get to this town in the tribe of Benjamin, and they're waiting for someone to take them in for the night, and no one will take them in, which is not the code of hospitality by any stretch, until a foreigner comes in from the fields. He sees this Levite and his little entourage setting up camp in the town center, and he says, oh, you guys can't stay here. This isn't safe. Let me bring you back to my house. So the foreigner brings the Israelite and his concubine back to their house. They're having dinner, and all of a sudden, we start hearing pounding on the front door. And the pounding on the front door turns out to be a bunch of ruffians in town, Israelite ruffians, who say, hey, we want that man that you've got in your house. Send him out front or we'll tear your house apart because we want to have sexual relations with him. Does this story sound familiar? Sodom and Gomorrah, the absolute paradigm of evil in your biblical text. But these are Israelites who are yelling for an Israelite, and it is the non-Israelite who's saying, no, 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 don't do this, my brothers, yeah? And so they have a big argument, and the host is trying to defend his guests, and our man, the Levite, he said, hey, don't get all wound up about this, just give him my wife. This is in your Bible. And so the Levite drags his wife outside and throws her out the door. Maybe not rated G. This girl is gang raped all night long, to the point where she crawls back to her host's home, puts her hand on the threshold, and dies. The next morning, the Levite priestly class wakes up. The man slept, first of all. He wakes up, opens the door. The text says he steps over her body, picks her up, throws her over his donkey, goes home, cuts her body into 12 pieces, slaps a Post-it note on each piece, sends the pieces out to the 12 tribes, and says, hey team, we've got trouble. This is the end of the book of Judges. What the narrator says, in those days there was no king in Israel, so each man did what was right in his own eyes. That everybody doing their own thing, you do you, I'll do me, it sounds really good in a magazine. It doesn't work for any sort of moral cohesiveness in a society. So it's at this point, bouncing off of rock bottom, where Yahweh looks at Israel and he says, I gave you the promised land. I pulled the Canaanites out so that you could have the promised land. And you look worse than the Canaanites. This is the end of the book. But in the midst, we have heroes. And in the midst of those heroes, we've got our girl Deborah. And I want to point out to you where Deborah lands in the mix for lots of reasons. Okay, I know this is a coloring page, but it's still fun. Take a look at your 12. By the way, those are some of my students landing in Tel Aviv. I'm showing you the picture because I can. That's all. All right, so we're looking at the 12 tribes, these 12 cycles, and here's our girl Deborah, right here. Who you gonna call? You're gonna call Deborah, yeah? She is fourth in this lineup. Now, I know that many of you, if you've heard of Deborah, you have heard of her as the only female judge in Israel's history. And some of you have heard of her as the only female judge in Israel's history, and perhaps have heard teachings about how the only reason she's called to lead is because there were no men available. That's how I want to think about my life and calling. The only reason that the Holy Spirit has tapped me to serve the kingdom is because there were no men available. Sarcasm. Okay. So Deborah, look at her numbering. She's number 4. She's not number 1. She's not number 3. She's not number 7, 10, or 12. She does not fall into any stylized slot, which tells us she is not an affirmative action hire. Okay, there's nothing unique about Deborah's status except for the quality of her status. She is unique a little because she actually judges for 40 years. If she's an anomaly, she's a very long anomaly. 40 years. Now, thinking that a really good lifespan in the ancient world is 65, really good lifespan, that means that our girl Deborah took over fresh out of Samford University, yeah? She is young, married, expected to have babies. She's named a mother in Israel. This is the ultimate working mom, yeah? And as the ultimate working mom, we're not looking at an anomaly. We're looking at the Margaret Thatcher of the ancient world, yeah? We're looking at this amazing mixture of leadership, training, and willingness. I will shout this throughout the curriculum. What made Deborah famous? She said yes. Was she a likely leader? Look, in our world, she wouldn't be a likely leader. There's only one Margaret Thatcher, yeah? Is she a likely leader? Is she the first person you'd turn to? No. But is she one of the only judges who is identified as judge and prophet? Samuel is the only other person who's got that title. Does she judge for an entire generation? Yes. And is this woman able to keep 12 unruly tribes in a point of unity so that when they're in a crisis, they turn to her? And the answer is yes, yes, yes. Okay, so let's introduce you to Deborah. I think it's time for you to meet her. Yes, it is. I think I need a little ramp up on that. I think it's time for us to meet the great prophetess and judge, Deborah. Woo! Thank you. All right, so I was looking for pictures, and the first picture I found was this one. I actually forgot that I had that in there. Okay. I really liked this picture, but I thought she looked a little too much like an elven queen. So I decided to take another step, and I went here. Yeah? Queenly, I liked that. Tough, yeah. Knows what to do with a weapon, like that too. But just a touch too modern, perhaps the pillbox hat really pushed me over the edge. Okay, and now that Harry and Meghan have moved to Santa Barbara, I thought this might not be a good move either. Okay, so then I went here. Okay, this one's really nice. This is coming from the Nebraska State Capitol. Did you know that? And this is supposed to be Deborah interacting with Barak. But if you know anything about ancient Near Eastern art, everyone in this image is either a Persian or an Assyrian. So we're going to have to just throw that one out too. Really liked this one. Okay, yeah? Wonder Woman, are you with me? My favorite part of that movie has absolutely nothing to do with Gal Gadot or the fight against the death deity. My favorite part is the first 10 minutes of that film, where an entire squadron of over 40-year-old, I don't know how to translate this without swearing in church, totally buff, we'll go there, okay, totally buff, tough as nails, actresses come out as the Amazons. Do you remember this? And this one is 51 years old, yeah? She is taking the role of Antiope, the general of the Amazon army, yeah? Take a look at those triceps. Come on. My garage workout never accomplishes that. In fact, I think those little cuffs might be to actually hide the fact that she's got over 50-year-old triceps. Okay, this woman is tough as nails. This is Robin Wright from Princess Bride, if you didn't know. Apparently, they hired a whole bunch of professional athletes, cage fighters, and lady wrestlers for those parts. And according to Newsweek, makeup took forever because they had to cover all the tats. Love it. Okay, so although I really liked this image, here's the problem. Deborah isn't actually a warrior. And she's not a warrior in the book, and she wasn't a warrior in her real life. Because here's the deal. Us female types have about 15% less muscle mass than you not female types. Our diaphragms are smaller, our shoulders are narrower, and we are not the best choice for hand-to-hand combat, which is a real bummer. So I had to go here. It's probably an historically appropriate presentation. Deborah, by the time we meet her, is likely a widow. And she's likely a military widow as well, because her husband's name is Lapidot, which means flames, which is also the word you use for the blade on top of a spear. So when you see a battalion marching in, and the sunlight catches the metal blades on top of their javelins, their spears, it looks like flames, right? So they will often speak of that weapon with some form of lapidot. Her husband's name is Lapidot. He was probably a military man. So by the time we meet her, her children are raised. She's probably a widow. She is prophet. She is judge, commander-in-chief, mother in Israel, military wife, liturgist, and hero. And every inch an unlikely leader that stepped into her role because of the quality of her character. She said yes. Okay, because I'm running short on time, I'm just going to jump ahead, and we're going to do a little shout out here to our man Tom Schreiner, who makes the point. He has a lengthy essay about how Deborah isn't actually a judge. And although I have a great deal of respect for Dr. Schreiner, and he has very good training, special pleading all over the place. She seems to be the only judge in Judges who has no military function. Did Moses have a military function during the wilderness wanderings? No. In fact, what Moses did is he stood up on a hill overlooking the battalions and told them where and when and how to fight, because he was too old to actually join the battle at that point in time. And when Deborah is summoned to accompany Barak, her commander-in-chief, she's going along as a prophet, just like Moses called in his prophets, Saul called in his prophets, and David called in his prophets. There is nothing at all unusual about this woman being commander-in-chief as opposed to enlisted man. Okay, so Deborah takes this role, and we want to ask the question, what did Deborah think was worth fighting for? Now, Deborah judges for 40 years, and we've only got one story. Just like the prophet Jonah was a prophet for probably about 35 years, and we've only got one story of his. Because there's only one story in the mix that your biblical authors, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, felt was worthy of the canon. And that's this: fighting for the Jezreel Valley. This is what Deborah says is worth fighting for. Now take a look at this map again. You've seen this map now several times. Right here, I'm going to do that again, right there is the Jezreel Valley. Now first of all, if you've got one drop of farming blood in your veins, you look at Jezreel and go, oh, yeah, totally fertile, the breadbasket of this region of the world, but perhaps even more important, it is the only east-west pass between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Every caravan that ever traveled, every army that ever marched, had to go through the Jezreel. Do we want to control the Jezreel? Yes, we do want to control the Jezreel. Taking a look at that map again, if you can see the tiny little print, who should have the Jezreel? Zebulun should have the Jezreel. Naphtali should have the Jezreel. Issachar should have the Jezreel. But as we step into this story, none of them have the Jezreel. Rather, as we read the text, as Deborah's story begins, after Ehud's death, that's the judge before, think about that cycle, the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. So Yahweh sold them, intentional word choice, because what does Yahweh do with them out of Egypt? He buys them out of Egypt. Now he sells them into the hand of Jabin of Hatzor. Oh yeah, we need to remember where that city is, a king of Canaan. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. There's no test when we're done. Sisera, who had 900 chariots of iron and ruthlessly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. So the people of Israel cried out to Yahweh for help. You know the cycle, yeah? So when they cry out to Yahweh for help, what's he going to do? He's going to send them a deliverer. Who is the deliverer going to be this time? It's going to be Deborah, who is already judging, already ruling, already has societal leadership. She's already recognized, and she is going to be the one who's going to turn to the military men and said, all right, team, put your money where your mouth is. It's time to fight. It's time to fight. So what she will wind up doing is, let me jump to this part of time. I want to tell you about chariots and training war horses, and I don't have time for that, so I'm just going to have to jump over here to Deborah, a prophetess. The wife of Lapidot was judging Israel at the time. So this woman steps forward. This woman says yes. And she says yes in a situation where there has been 20 years of oppression. So here we go. Deborah sent and summoned Barak. Military terminology. She's the commander-in-chief. He is a local clan chieftain. And she calls him, here's Deborah, down south. You saw that? Do it again. She calls him from either Kadesh up here or Kadesh down here. And as Anson Rainey says, it's Kadesh down here, and Anson Rainey is always right. We're going with Kadesh down here. She summons him. Now, I want you to notice on that map that he's got a good 70-mile track to follow if he's going to answer the summons. And what you might not see is he is crossing enemy territory left and right to get to our girl Deborah. So she summons him. He's standing in front of her, and Deborah says, has not Yahweh, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go! Gather your men at Mount Tabor. Take 10,000 of the people from Naphtali and Zebulun. So Barak travels down across enemy territory. She gives him the war oracle, and he responds by going to Mount Tabor. You're following it on the map. He's going to rally the men of Naphtali, rally the men of Zebulun, and Deborah is going to meet him up at Mount Tabor in order to face down Sisera, yellow circle, who works for Jabin. Guys, I'm unfortunately at the end of my time because you want to know all about ironclad chariots. I know it. But guys, as we look at this story, we are looking at our team. We're looking at the people of God who have lost territory that belongs to them. And for 20 years, every effort of resistance and rebellion has been crushed. And so they're standing there saying, let them have it. There's nothing more we can do. Until this brave, courageous leader, this unlikely hero, steps forward and says, what territory, O men of Naphtali and Zebulun, can you see from where you're standing that you know belongs to the kingdom of God? And they all say, it's the Valley of Jezreel. It's the richest farmland in our country. It's where the great trade routes are. Is this territory worth fighting for? And the men of Naphtali and Zebulun say, well, it would be, but there's absolutely no way we can win. We are outmanned, outnumbered, outplanned, yeah? A little Hamilton quotation here. There's no way we can do this. And Deborah looks them in the eye and says, I'm sorry. What are you going to do about it? And this is the set of questions that I will ask you throughout this curriculum. This question of what territory can you see from where you're standing that you know has been promised to the people of God, but for whatever reason is not yet in the hands of the people of God. And every one of you has an answer to that question. And it could be the public library downtown, where the adult tutoring program has collapsed because there aren't enough volunteers. And as a result, the public schools in Birmingham don't have the support they need for these kids to get a leg up and out of the hood. It could be that. It could be the food pantry that is also downtown that desperately needs your help. It could be your neighbor next door, or the relative that you're afraid to share the gospel with? Yeah? What territory can you see from where you're standing that you know has been promised to the people of God, but for whatever reason is not yet in the hands of the people of God? First question. Second question, is it worth fighting for? Deborah's response is absolutely. The 10,000 who gather behind Barak, they know who they're taking on. They know they're going to die. Guys, this is Gandalf and Aragorn at the Black Gate. There is no chance that Barak's volunteer farmers turned warriors can defeat the crack units of Sisera with 900 chariots. No way. If Yahweh doesn't show up, our team is going down. And yet, based on the character of Barak and the proven track record of Deborah, those 10,000 men show up anyway. And when Barak gives the word, after Deborah gives the word, they go charging down the mountain because they have already answered the question in their own hearts. What are you? What am I going to do about it? And I will make the argument in this curriculum that this story has been given to us as one of the great stories. We are supposed to use it as a paradigm. Can I tell you that persecution has never killed the church? Can I tell you that hard times have never squashed the gospel? Can I tell you that comfort and complacency has silenced the church in every generation of church history? So Deborah and Barak look us in the eyes, and they say, what territory can you see? Is it worth fighting for? And what are you going to do about it? Amen and amen. Thank you for listening. All right.